Now, what about that second question? What is the evidence that God does exist? Here I offered 5 lines of evidence. First, the origin of the universe. Notice that Dr. Slizak responds to this argument by agreeing with that crucial second premise that the universe began to exist. In order to deny the conclusion, therefore, he is forced to deny the first premise, that whatever begins to exist has a cause, and he turns his guns upon it. Now, by a cause, I mean something that produces or brings into being its effect. And my argument is that whatever begins to exist must have a cause in that sense. Now, notice that Dr. Slizak does not refute this causal principle. He gives no reason at all to deny that this premise is true or to think that it is false. He merely asks the question, what reason is there to think that it is true? Well, let me give 2 reasons on behalf of the causal premise. Number 1, I think it is an obvious first principle of metaphysics. Being does not come from non-being. Something does not come from nothing. Atheists themselves recognize this truth. For example, David Hume, who is something of a hero to Professor Slizak, wrote to John Stewart, "I never asserted so absurd a proposition as that anything might arise without a cause. I only maintained that our certainty of the falsehood of that proposition proceeded neither from intuition nor demonstration, but from another source." The atheist philosopher Kai Nielsen gives the following illustration. He says, suppose you suddenly hear a loud bang, and you ask me, what made that bang? And I reply, nothing. It just happened. He says, you wouldn't accept that. In fact, you would find my reply quite unintelligible. Indeed, it really is unintelligible how being could come from absolute non-being. Just think about it. In the case of the universe, prior to the Big Bang, there wasn't even the potentiality of the existence of the universe. But then how could the universe become actual if there wasn't even the potentiality of its being? Or think again. Suppose that something could come into existence from nothing. If that were the case, then it's inexplicable why just anything and everything doesn't pop into being out of nothing. But no one here tonight is worried that while you're listening to this debate, a horse may have popped into being uncaused out of nothing in your living room and is there defiling the carpet right now as we speak. As Dr. Slizak himself has written in another context, only academics could be so ridiculous. If made seriously outside the seminar room, such claims would be evidence of clinical derangement. In fact, the suggestion that the universe popped into being uncaused out of nothing is worse than magic when you think about it. At least in the case of magic, when the magician pulls a rabbit out of the hat, at least you've got the magician and the hat. But in the case of atheism, the universe or the rabbit just pops into being out of absolutely nothing. And I submit to you that's just metaphysically crazy. So that's the first reason, I think, on behalf of the causal premise. Secondly, the causal premise is a universally verified and never falsified principle of empirical science. This should be the highest form of proof to Dr. Slizak as an empiricist. And notice you cannot dismiss the causal principle like a taxi cab when you get to the origin of the universe. The only reason that anyone would deny it in that context is out of a desire to avoid the theism that it implies. But that is simply question begging in favor of atheism. So in short, I think that the first premise is impeccable, that we have good reason to believe that whatever begins to exist has a cause. But Dr. Slizak insists the Big Bang, he says, cannot have a cause because there was nothing before it. And here he quotes Quentin Smith on this head. Unfortunately, he misquotes Smith, who is the collaborator with me in our book, Theism, Atheism, and Big Bang Cosmology. What Quentin actually says in the book on page 120 is that the initial singularity cannot be the result of a prior natural process. But, he says, this still leaves open the question of whether the singularity or the Big Bang is an effect of a supernatural cause. He notes that such a supernatural explanation does not violate the singularity theorems because it does not try to extend the space-time manifold beyond the singularity. Now, Dr. Slezak says, well, the Big Bang can't have a cause because there was no time before the Big Bang. But notice the hidden assumption here. He assumes that causes must always precede their effects in time, but that's patently false. Causes can be simultaneous with their effects in time. And I would say in the case of God's creating the universe, God's creating the universe is simultaneous with the universe coming into being. Thus, even though there is no time before the Big Bang, God can create the universe by creating it at the moment of the Big Bang.